Sherlock Holmes and the Enigma of the Ancient Lighthouse. Chapter 1. The Curious Case of Mr. Blackwood. The autumn of 1889 brought with it a peculiar chill that penetrated the walls of our lodgings at 221B Baker Street. Fog hung heavy over London, transforming familiar buildings into ghostly apparitions. It was during this dreary season that my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, found himself in one of his contemplative moods, having gone nearly 3 weeks without a case worthy of his remarkable talents. I returned from my morning rounds to find Holmes by the fire, thumbing through correspondence with evident disinterest. "Ah, Watson," he greeted me without looking up. "I trust Mrs. Harrington's rheumatism is showing improvement under your care?" I hung my coat, no longer surprised by such deductions. "Indeed, Holmes, though I don't recall mentioning that I was treating Mrs. Harrington today, your coat sleeve bears traces of the distinctive lavender oil she insists upon having rubbed into her joints, and there is a smudge of purple ink on your cuff, the same color she uses for her correspondence. Rather elementary. And what of your morning? Any prospects to alleviate this tedium?" Holmes tossed aside a letter. "Nothing but the most pedestrian problems, Watson. A missing husband undoubtedly in the arms of his secretary in Brighton, a stolen necklace taken by the lady's own nephew, and a threatened blackmail so transparent that even Lestrade might solve it without assistance. London's criminal class seems determined to disappoint me." No sooner had these words left his lips than Mrs. Hudson announced a visitor who insisted upon seeing Mr. Holmes on a matter of the utmost urgency. Our visitor was a man of imposing stature, with broad shoulders and the weathered complexion of one who spent considerable time at sea. His thick beard was flecked with gray, and his piercing blue eyes darted nervously about the room. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he inquired in a deep voice that carried the faintest trace of a West Country accent. "Indeed," Holmes replied. "Please, be seated, Captain. I perceive you have traveled from Cornwall with some haste regarding a matter that has troubled your sleep these past 3 nights. Our visitor's eyes widened in astonishment. "How could you possibly know that I am a captain? That I've come from Cornwall, or about my recent insomnia? Your bearing suggests naval command, confirmed by the tattoo visible beneath your shirt cuff, an anchor with a pattern particular to men who served on the Atlantic routes. Your boots bear the reddish clay, peculiar to the Cornish coastline, and there is a train ticket in your pocket dated yesterday. As for your sleeplessness, the 3 days' growth of beard you have attempted to trim, combined with the strained redness about your eyes, suggests a man too preoccupied to attend to his usual habits. My name is Edward Blackwood. I was captain of the merchant vessel Lydia Marie until my retirement 5 years ago. I now serve as the chief lighthouse keeper at Pendlethorn Point on the northern Cornish coast." He paused, twisting his cap anxiously. "What I have to relate may sound like superstitious ravings, but I assure you, I am a man of reason, and have exhausted all logical explanations." "Pray continue, Captain Blackwood," Holmes said, leaning forward. "The cases which appear most fantastic often prove to have the most rational explanations. 3 weeks ago, the assistant keeper, William Trelawney, disappeared during his night watch. The log showed his entries until midnight, then nothing. His coat remained, his dinner half-eaten. The lighthouse door was locked from within, yet he had vanished without a trace. Could he not have gone outside? I inquired. The lighthouse sits on a rocky promontory, accessible only by a narrow path treacherous even in daylight. That night, a storm raged with such ferocity that no man could have survived in those waters. Local authorities investigated, I presume? Holmes asked. They concluded that Trelawney must have fallen into the sea, though they could offer no explanation as to how he exited a locked lighthouse. Blackwood lowered his voice. A week later, the night watchman from the village claimed to have seen a light moving within the old ruins near the lighthouse. Ruins? The remains of an ancient lighthouse, built by monks in the 12th century, and abandoned after a series of mysterious deaths. 2 nights ago, I myself saw a cloaked figure moving among the ruins. When I investigated at dawn, I found this. From his pocket, Blackwood produced a tarnished bronze medallion bearing an intricate pattern and a Latin inscription. Holmes examined it closely. The inscription reads, Lux in tenebris custos. Light in darkness, guardian. Most intriguing. Yesterday morning I received this note, Blackwood continued, producing a folded paper. In elegant script were written the words, Return what was taken, or the Pendlethorn light will claim another, as it has for 7 centuries. The order. Watch as always. Captain, are there local legends regarding this order? Holmes asked. The villagers speak of an ancient brotherhood that once maintained the old light, guardians of some secret knowledge. And every few decades, someone vanishes, usually from the lighthouse or its vicinity. Holmes sprang to his feet. Watson, we shall need to pack for Cornwall. Captain, when does the next train depart? 4 o'clock this afternoon. Excellent. We shall be on it. This case presents several points of unique interest. A locked lighthouse, ancient ruins, a mysterious brotherhood, and a warning note. Most stimulating indeed. As our visitor departed, I felt a familiar mixture of excitement and trepidation. Holmes's eyes had that peculiar gleam I associated with his most dangerous cases. What do you make of it, Holmes? I asked. It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data, Watson, he replied. But beneath the veneer of superstitious dread, I detect the workings of a calculating intelligence. Whether our missing lighthouse keeper fell victim to foul play or is himself involved in something sinister remains to be seen. What is certain is that the enigma of the ancient lighthouse promises to be a case of uncommon complexity. As Holmes spoke, the fog pressed closer against our windows, a fitting backdrop to the mystery that awaited us on the wild Cornish coast. Chapter 2. Journey to Pendlethorn Point. The journey to Cornwall was long but not unpleasant. Holmes spent most of it in contemplative silence, his eyes half closed as the countryside rushed past our window, occasionally making notes in his small leather-bound journal. I had learned from experience not to disturb him during these periods of intense reflection, and instead occupied myself with the latest medical journal and the passing scenery. What do you know of medieval monastic orders, Watson? Holmes asked, suddenly breaking his silence as our train curved along the coastline, providing our first glimpse of the churning Atlantic. Very little beyond the basics, I admitted. The Benedictines, Cistercians, and such. Why do you ask? I am particularly interested in those orders concerned with the preservation of knowledge, Holmes continued, ignoring my question. During the darkest periods of our history, it was often these isolated brotherhoods who maintained the flame of learning when others would have extinguished it. Some, I believe, guarded secrets deemed too dangerous for general dissemination. Before I could inquire further, Holmes withdrew into silence again, and it was not until we arrived at the small coastal station of Trevose that he resumed our conversation. Captain Blackwood had arranged for a trap to meet us, driven by a taciturn local man who introduced himself merely as Penrose. As we wound our way along narrow lanes bordered by ancient stone walls, the landscape grew increasingly wild. The road eventually brought us to a small fishing village nestled in a sheltered cove, its gray stone cottages huddled together as if for protection against the elements. Pendlethorn Village, Penrose announced gruffly. The lighthouse is yonder, atop the headland. Following his gesture, I saw a stark white tower rising from a rocky promontory that jutted dramatically into the sea. Even in the fading afternoon light, it presented an imposing silhouette against the darkening sky. To its right, I could just make out jagged ruins that must have been the ancient lighthouse Captain Blackwood had mentioned. We shall stay at the inn tonight, Watson, Holmes decided. I wish to speak with the locals before visiting the lighthouse tomorrow. The Mariner's Rest was a small establishment catering primarily to the occasional traveler or coastal trader. Its common room was occupied by several weathered-looking men who regarded us with undisguised curiosity as we entered. "Strangers are noticed here," Holmes murmured as we found a table in the corner. "Oh, all to our advantage." The innkeeper, a red-faced man named Tregarth, was more forthcoming than his patrons, especially after Holmes ordered a round of drinks for the house. "Terrible business about young Trelawney," Tregarth remarked as he served our supper. "Known him since he was a lad. Not the sort to wander off, and certainly not in such weather." "I understand this is not the first disappearance associated with the lighthouse," Holmes commented casually. A hush fell over the room. Tregarth glanced nervously at the other patrons before responding. "There have been incidents over the years," he acknowledged reluctantly. "My grandfather used to tell tales of the old lighthouse and the monks who built it." "And what became of these monks?" Holmes pressed. An elderly man at the next table leaned toward us. "They were not ordinary monks, sir," he interjected. "The Brotherhood of the Eternal Light, they called themselves. Students of ancient knowledge, some say. Others claim they were guardians of something never meant to be found." "And you are?" Holmes inquired. "Ezekiel Pentreath, sir. My family has fished these waters for generations." The old man's eyes darted to the window where darkness had fallen completely. "The Brotherhood vanished during a great storm in 1547. All found dead in the lighthouse, save for their leader, who was never found." Holmes's eyes gleamed with interest. "And the new lighthouse? When was it built?" 1823, Pentreath replied. "After 3 ships were wrecked in a single month. But they say the land never forgot the old Brotherhood. Strange lights have been seen in the ruins since I was a boy, and those who venture too close often meet with misfortune." Another man, younger and clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, interrupted. "Superstitious nonsense," he declared. "Trelawney likely fell into the sea. These cliffs are treacherous." "And you are?" Holmes asked. "Michael Harris. I'm the night watchman who reported the light in the ruins." His voice held a defensive note. "I know what I saw, despite what others might think." "I should very much like to hear your account, Mr. Harris," Holmes said. The young man nodded. "It was just after midnight, nearly 3 weeks after Trelawney vanished. I was making my rounds along the cliff path when I saw it. A pale blue light moving among the ruins, steady as if carried. No natural phosphorescence, mind you. I called, out thinking perhaps someone was searching for something, but it vanished instantly." "Did you investigate?" I asked. "Not then, sir. The tide was high, and the path to the ruins is dangerous enough in daylight. I gathered several men the next morning, but we found nothing unusual. Except the medallion that Captain Blackwood discovered later," Holmes noted. Harris looked startled. "I didn't know about any medallion." "Most interesting," Holmes murmured almost to himself. "Tell me, Mr. Pentreath, are there any local families descended from the original Brotherhood?" The old man hesitated. "There were rumors that the Trevelyan's had such connections. They owned the land where both lighthouses stand before selling it to the Crown in the 1800s. The last of them, an antiquarian of sorts, died without heirs some 20 years ago. And his collection? His papers?" Holmes pressed. "Donated to the county museum in Truro, I believe, though many items were reportedly stolen before the authorities could catalog them." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "One final question. Has anyone of scholarly interest visited the area recently, perhaps asking questions about the old lighthouse? Or the Brotherhood?" The innkeeper and Harris exchanged glances. "There was a gentleman about a month ago," Tregarth offered. "Foreign-sounding, though his English was perfect. Said he was researching coastal defenses for a historical society." "Did he give a name?" "Professor Morelli from Italy or some such place. Stayed 3 nights, asked many questions, then departed suddenly." Holmes's expression remained impassive, but I detected the slightest tension in his posture. "I believe we should retire, Watson," he announced, rising from the table. "Tomorrow promises to be most illuminating, As we climbed the narrow stairs to our rooms, I could contain my curiosity no longer. "What do you make of all this, Holmes?" "A tapestry is forming, Watson, though several critical threads remain elusive." His eyes held that distant look that told me his formidable mind was assembling the puzzle pieces. "We face something older and more complex than a simple lighthouse keeper's disappearance. Rest well, my friend. I suspect our visit to Pendlethorn Light tomorrow will be quite revealing." That night I was awakened by Holmes standing at the window, his silhouette sharp against the moonlight that streamed into our room. "Look there, Watson," he whispered urgently. Following his gaze, I beheld a faint blue glow emanating from the distant ruins, moving with deliberate purpose through the ancient stones. Chapter 3. The Keeper's Quarters. "Wake up, Watson. The tide is favorable, and we must make haste." Holmes's urgent voice roused me from slumber, as the first pale light of dawn filtered through our window. I found him already dressed, his lean face animated with the excitement of the chase. "The light, Holmes. Did you see where it went?" I asked, hastily pulling on my clothes. "It disappeared shortly after I woke you. Most curious, it seemed to retreat into the ground itself." He handed me a cup of strong tea. "I've sent word to Captain Blackwood that we shall join him at the lighthouse within the hour. The morning tide exposes a path to the ruins that will soon be submerged." We departed the inn without breakfast, much to my dismay, and followed a narrow track that wound precariously along the cliff edge. The morning air was bracing, heavy with salt and the promise of rain. Below us, the sea churned against jagged rocks, sending plumes of white spray skyward. "Observe, Watson," Holmes said, pointing to a narrow causeway of wet stone that connected the mainland to the rocky outcrop where the ruins stood. "That path is only accessible for approximately 90 minutes during the lowest tide. At all other times, the ruins are effectively isolated by the sea." Captain Blackwood awaited us at the door of the lighthouse, his weathered face grave. "I saw it too, gentlemen. The light in the ruins. First time it's appeared on consecutive nights in living memory. Has anything else unusual occurred?" Holmes inquired as we followed Blackwood into the lighthouse. "Nothing, though I confess I slept poorly. This way, I've prepared Trelawney's quarters for your inspection, just as they were found." The interior of the lighthouse was immaculately maintained, its brass fittings polished to a high shine, the stone floor scrubbed clean. A spiral staircase wound upward to the lantern room, while a narrow corridor led to modest living quarters. William Trelawney's room was Spartan but comfortable. A narrow bed, a small writing desk, a bookshelf, and a sea chest. Nothing appeared disturbed. The bed was made, the desk neat. Holmes examined the room meticulously, his keen eyes missing nothing. He inspected the window, which was small but unbarred, opening it to assess whether a man might pass through. "Possible, though difficult," he murmured, "and the drop to the rocks below would be fatal." He turned his attention to the bookshelf, scanning the titles. "Your assistant had scholarly interests, Captain." "Aye, educated lad. Cambridge, I believe, though he never spoke much of it." Holmes selected a volume, leafing through it carefully. A treatise on ancient Celtic and pre-Roman astronomical observations. Unusual reading for a lighthouse keeper. I examined the desk while Holmes continued his inspection of the books. "Look at this, Holmes," I said, indicating a sheet of paper covered with strange symbols and calculations. Holmes peered over my shoulder. "Astronomical calculations, but using an unusual methodology. Most interesting." He pocketed the paper, then knelt to examine the sea chest. Inside were the usual personal effects: clothing, letters, a pocket watch. At the bottom, wrapped in cloth, Holmes discovered a small brass sextant of antique design. "This is no ordinary navigational instrument," Holmes remarked, examining it closely. "The markings are non-standard, and there are additional dials whose purpose is not immediately apparent." "It belonged to his grandfather," Blackwood explained. "Trelawney was quite attached to it, though I never saw him use it for its intended purpose. Holmes pocketed this as well, with Blackwood's permission, then stood in the center of the room, his eyes closed as if visualizing events. "Show me the lantern room and the logbook," he said suddenly. The lantern room occupied the uppermost level of the lighthouse, a circular chamber dominated by the massive Fresnel lens that focused the light out to sea. The logbook sat on a small desk, open to the night of Trelawney's disappearance. Holmes studied the final entries. 10:15 p.m. Weather deteriorating. Barometer falling rapidly. Wind SW, force 6.1130. p.m. Storm increasing. Visibility poor. 2 fishing vessels observed making for harbor. 1:45 p.m. Strange light observed in ruins. Possibly. The entry terminated mid-sentence. No signs of struggle, Holmes observed, examining the desk and floor. Ink not spilled, chair positioned normally. He moved to the windows, circling the room slowly. "These are all securely fastened. From within?" "Yes, Mr. Holmes. When I came on duty at 6 a.m., everything was locked tight. The door to the stairs, all the windows. No way in or out except past me, and I'm a light sleeper." Holmes nodded, then bent suddenly to examine something. On the floor, using his pocket magnifying glass, he studied a small dark smudge near the desk. "Would you say the lantern room is kept as meticulously clean as the rest of the lighthouse, Captain?" "Absolutely. Trelawney was particular about it." "Then this is significant," Holmes murmured, scraping a sample into a small envelope. "Now, Captain, I should like to examine the ruins while the tide permits." The ancient lighthouse ruins stood on a rocky island connected to the mainland by the narrow causeway Holmes had indicated earlier. Only the base of the structure remained, intact. A circular foundation approximately 20 feet in diameter, constructed of massive granite blocks. Scattered around it were fallen stones, some bearing weathered carvings. The original tower stood nearly 80 feet tall, Blackwood informed us, collapsed during the Great Storm of 1547. The same night the Brotherhood perished. Holmes circled the ruins, examining the stones carefully. "These are not random carvings," he observed, pointing to symbols similar to those on Trelawney's papers. They appeared to be astronomical notations of some kind. He continued his inspection, occasionally consulting his pocket compass, before stopping abruptly at the eastern side of the circular foundation. "Watson, lend me your assistance," he requested, kneeling beside a particular stone that appeared no different from the others to my untrained eye. Together we pushed against it, and to my astonishment, it moved slightly, revealing a narrow gap beneath. "How did you know?" I asked. "The lichen growth pattern was interrupted," Holmes explained, "and observe the ground, slight indentations suggesting recent movement." Before he could investigate further, Captain Blackwood called urgently from the causeway. "Gentlemen, the tide turns earlier than expected. We must leave immediately." Indeed, water was already beginning to cover the lowest parts of the path. With obvious reluctance, Holmes abandoned his discovery, and we hastened back to the mainland. "We shall return tonight," Holmes declared as we watched the causeway disappear beneath the rising sea. "I believe our mysterious light-bearer uses a passage that has remained hidden for centuries, a passage that young Trelawney may have discovered to his cost." As we turned away, I noticed Holmes staring intently at the new lighthouse. "What is it, Holmes?" "A figure at the upper window, Watson. Someone is watching us with considerable interest." I looked up, but the window was now empty, leaving me to wonder if Holmes's keen eyes had detected something mine had missed, or if the watcher had withdrawn the moment their presence was noticed. Chapter 4. The watchman's tale. Upon our return to the village, Holmes insisted on visiting the local churchyard. The ancient stone church of St. Petroc stood on a small rise overlooking the harbor, its weathered granite walls testifying to centuries of endurance against the elements. "What are we looking for, Holmes?" I asked, as we made our way among the lichen-covered gravestones. Historical context, Watson. The past often illuminates the present. He moved methodically through the cemetery, pausing occasionally to examine particular markers. Eventually, he stopped before a small cluster of graves set apart from the others. The stones were weathered almost to illegibility, but Holmes knelt to trace the faint carvings with his fingertips. Here lie 6 members of the Brotherhood, interred in consecrated ground despite the mysterious circumstances of their deaths. He pointed to the barely discernible symbol carved at the top of each stone, concentric circles intersected by a straight line. The same pattern appears on the medallion Blackwood found. But you said 7 died in the lighthouse, I noted. The leader's body was never found, according to Pentreath. Holmes rose, dusting off his knees. Most curious that these graves are segregated from the others. As we left the churchyard, Holmes suggested we separate to cover more ground. Visit the local physician, Watson. Your professional connection may encourage candor regarding Trelawney's character and habits. I shall call upon our night watchman, Mr. Harris. Dr. Polgarth, the village physician, proved to be an elderly man with sharp eyes and a courteous manner. When I explained my association with Holmes and our interest in Trelawney's disappearance, he invited me into his cluttered study. I knew William Trelawney well, he confirmed, offering me tea. Treated him for a mild case of bronchitis last winter. Intelligent young man, perhaps too much so for his position. He took the lighthouse post after abandoning his academic career at Cambridge. Some disappointment in his studies, I gathered, though he never elaborated. Did he have any particular interests or associates in the village? I inquired. He kept largely to himself, though he often visited the church to study the old parish records. Father Collins might tell you more about that. Polgarth hesitated. There was one peculiarity. Trelawney suffered occasional episodes of sleepwalking. He consulted me about it, concerned he might put himself in danger given his living quarters. Did you prescribe anything for this condition? A mild sedative, though he used it sparingly. Said it dulled his mind. This new information in hand, I rejoined Holmes at the inn. I found him in conversation with Harris, the night watchman, a nervous young man whose eyes darted frequently to the windows as the afternoon light began to fade. "Ah, Watson, excellent timing," Holmes greeted me. "Mr. Harris has been describing his duties in most illuminating detail." Harris nodded anxiously. "As I was saying, Mr. Holmes, I patrol from the harbor to the cliff path nightly. Been doing so for 3 years without incident until recently." "And when did you first notice unusual occurrences?" Holmes prompted. "About 2 months ago. Small things at first. Stones displaced on the cliff path. Items moved in the watchman's hut. Then footprints leading nowhere, as if someone had walked to the cliff edge and simply vanished." "Did you report these incidents?" "To whom?" "They'd think me mad or drunk." Harris leaned forward. "Then came the night I saw the foreign gentleman, Professor Morelli, walking along the cliff path well after midnight, carrying what looked like surveying equipment. When questioned, he claimed to be studying nocturnal coastal birds." Harris snorted. "In near total darkness, mind you." "And this was how long before Trelawney's disappearance?" "Perhaps 3 weeks. After that night, strange. Lights began appearing in the ruins." Holmes pressed his fingertips together. "Mr. Harris, did William Trelawney ever speak to you about the old lighthouse or its history?" "Not directly, sir, but I once observed him making drawings of the ruins at low tide. When he noticed me watching, he became almost defensive, claiming it was merely a hobby." Harris hesitated. "There was something else. The night before he vanished, I saw him talking with a stranger on the cliff path, a tall, thin man in dark clothing. They appeared to be arguing." "Could this have been Professor Morelli?" I asked. "No, sir. Different build entirely. This man moved with unusual grace, almost cat-like. When I approached, he melted into the shadows, and Trelawney refused to discuss the encounter." After Harris departed, I shared Dr. Polgarth's information about Trelawney's sleepwalking. "Most significant," Holmes remarked. "Though I doubt it explains his disappearance. The locked door remains our central puzzle." He withdrew Trelawney's papers from his pocket, studying the strange symbols. "These calculations appear to track celestial movements, but with reference points I cannot identify. And look here, recurring notations that may correspond to dates." Before I could respond, Captain Blackwood burst into the inn, his face pale. "Mr. Holmes, someone has broken into the lighthouse and ransacked Trelawney's quarters." We hurried back to the lighthouse, where I was stunned by the transformation of the previously orderly room. Books lay scattered across the floor, the mattress had been slashed, and the desk drawers upturned. "When did this occur?" Holmes demanded, surveying the chaos. "Within the hour. I'd gone to the village for supplies, leaving my assistant Jenkins on duty. When I returned, I found him unconscious at the base of the stairs." "And Mr. Jenkins's account?" "Claims he heard footsteps in Trelawney's room, but saw no one. When he investigated, he was struck from behind." Holmes examined the room methodically. Our intruder knew precisely what he sought. Notice how certain books were examined, while others were merely swept aside. He knelt to gather papers from the floor. "The desk has been thoroughly searched, but our visitor was interrupted before completing his task." What could he have been looking for? I wondered. "The same thing we seek, Watson. Answers." Holmes pointed to faint, muddy footprints visible on the clean floor. "Our visitor came directly from the ruins. Observe the distinctive red clay, mixed with a particular type of sand found only on the causeway." As darkness fell, Holmes announced his intention to return to the ruins. "The tide will be at its lowest at midnight. We shall discover what secrets lie beneath that movable stone." "You cannot be serious, Holmes," Blackwood protested. "The causeway is treacherous enough by day." "Which is precisely why we must go," Holmes replied firmly. "Someone else will certainly attempt it, given today's intrusion. I prefer to be the first to make this particular discovery." As we prepared for our midnight expedition, equipping ourselves with lanterns and rope, I could not shake a growing sense of foreboding. Holmes, however, was in his element, his eyes bright with the thrill of closing in on a solution. "Courage, Watson," he said, noting my apprehension. "We stand at the threshold of unraveling a mystery centuries in the making." Little did I realize then how prophetic his words would prove to be, or what ancient secrets awaited us beneath the ruins of Pendlethorn Light. Chapter 5. Beneath the Ancient Stones. Midnight found us making our way carefully along the treacherous causeway, our lanterns casting eerie shadows across the wet stones. The moon, nearly full, provided some illumination, but clouds scudding across. Its face plunged us intermittently into complete darkness. The tide was at its lowest ebb, exposing the narrow path to the ruins, but Holmes had calculated we would have less than an hour before the returning waters would cut off our retreat. Captain Blackwood had insisted on accompanying us, arguing that his knowledge of local tides might prove vital. He led the way, his sturdy figure moving with the confidence of a man accustomed to navigating precarious paths. "We must be swift yet thorough," Holmes cautioned as we reached the circular foundation of the Ancient Lighthouse. "Watson, keep watch while the captain and I locate the movable stone." I positioned myself where I could observe both the causeway and the modern lighthouse across the water. The night was unnaturally still, the only sounds being the gentle lapping of waves and the occasional cry of a night bird. "Here," Holmes called softly. He and Blackwood were kneeling at the eastern edge of the foundation, carefully working to shift the large stone we had discovered earlier. It moved with surprising ease, as if designed to do so, revealing a narrow opening into darkness. Holmes directed his lantern into the aperture. Stone steps descending in a spiral, well preserved, though clearly ancient. He turned to Blackwood. "Is this known to local historians?" The captain shook his head, his expression bewildered. "I've lived here all my life and never heard mention of chambers beneath the old lighthouse." "Then we are about to make a significant historical discovery." Holmes prepared to descend. "I shall go first. Watson, follow at a distance of 5 steps. Captain, you will remain here to ensure our exit remains accessible." The stairway was narrow but expertly constructed, the stones fitting together with remarkable precision. We descended in silence, the air growing noticeably cooler and heavy, with the scent of salt and age. I counted 37 steps before the passage leveled out into a small antechamber hewn from the living rock. "Remarkable," Holmes breathed, raising his lantern to illuminate walls covered with carvings similar to those we had observed on the surface stones. "This chamber predates the lighthouse itself, Watson. These markings are not medieval, but appear to be of Celtic origin." 3 passages led from the antechamber. Holmes examined the floor carefully, then selected the leftmost tunnel. "Recent footprints," he explained, pointing to faint disturbances in the dust. "Someone has been here within the past 24 hours. The passage wound deeper into the rock, occasionally widening into small chambers, all bearing the same intricate carvings. Eventually, we emerged into a larger circular room that caused both of us to halt in astonishment. The chamber was approximately 30 feet in diameter, its domed ceiling supported by slender columns. At its center stood a stone table or altar, upon which rested an object covered by a rotting cloth. The walls were lined with recessed shelves containing scrolls, small artifacts, and what appeared to be ancient scientific instruments. "We have found the secret repository of the Brotherhood," Holmes whispered, his voice tinged with rare awe. "A collection of knowledge preserved for centuries beneath the lighthouse." He approached the central altar cautiously. "These instruments are not medieval, Watson. They appear to be of Roman design, but with modifications I cannot account for." He carefully lifted the decaying cloth from the central object, revealing a complex mechanical device, reminiscent of a planetarium or orrery, but with additional components of unfamiliar purpose. "An astronomical calculator of some kind," he murmured, "but far more sophisticated than anything known to have existed in ancient Britain." I turned my attention to the shelves, where dozens of scrolls were stored in cylindrical cases of some tarnished metal. "Holmes, these appear to be star charts, but the constellations are oddly configured." "Do not disturb them," Holmes cautioned. "Their preservation after so many centuries is remarkable, but exposure to our lantern light and modern air may damage them irreparably." He circled the chamber slowly, examining everything with his characteristic thoroughness. "The Brotherhood was not merely a religious order, Watson. They were guardians of ancient knowledge, astronomical observations stretching back perhaps thousands of years. But what connection does this have to Trelawney's disappearance?" I wondered. Holmes pointed to a small desk in one corner where modern papers lay scattered, clearly Trelawney's work. "Our missing lighthouse keeper discovered this chamber and was translating these records. But why would this lead to his disappearance, or the evident interest of our mysterious Professor Morelli?" He fell silent, examining Trelawney's notes. "Most curious. He believed he had discovered a recurring celestial event predicted in these ancient records. A rare alignment due to occur." Holmes paused, consulting his pocket watch. "4 nights from now." A sudden noise from the passage we had entered caused us both to turn sharply. "Captain Blackwood?" I called, but received no answer. "Extinguish your lantern," Holmes hissed. I complied instantly, plunging us into darkness broken only by a faint blue glow emanating from the entry tunnel, the same spectral light we had observed from our inn window. The light grew stronger, and I detected the sound of soft footsteps. Approaching. Holmes pulled me behind one of the stone columns as a tall figure entered the chamber, bearing an unusual lamp that produced the otherworldly blue illumination. The newcomer moved directly to the central astronomical device, seeming to make adjustments to its components. In the strange light, I could discern only that he wore dark clothing and moved with deliberate precision. Holmes tightened his grip on my arm in silent warning as the figure turned suddenly toward our hiding place. For a terrible moment, I was certain we had been discovered, but a shout from above distracted our mysterious visitor. "Mr. Holmes! Dr. Watson! The tide turns early. We must leave immediately!" Captain Blackwood's warning echoed down the passage. The dark figure froze, then hastily retreated down the rightmost tunnel, not the one by which we had entered. "After him, Watson!" Holmes cried, relighting his lantern. We pursued, but the passage branched repeatedly, and soon we found ourselves in an unfamiliar section of the underground complex. "We must return," I urged as water began to seep into the passage. "The tide?" "Yes," Holmes agreed reluctantly. "But mark this location well in your memory, Watson. We shall return better prepared." We retraced our steps with difficulty, the water rising alarmingly by the time we reached the spiral staircase. Captain Blackwood helped pull us through the opening, which was already partially submerged. "Another few minutes and you would have been trapped until the next low tide," he admonished, as we hastened back across the causeway, now reduced to a narrow strip of stone barely above the water's surface. Safely back on the mainland, I turned to Holmes. "What do you make of it? Who was that figure?" Holmes's face was grave in the moonlight. "Someone with knowledge both of the chamber's existence and the ancient device it contains. Someone who, I suspect, has a vested interest in the celestial event Trelawney discovered." He gazed thoughtfully at the now submerged ruins. "The question, Watson, is whether that interest is scientific or something far more sinister. And Trelawney? I fear our missing lighthouse keeper may have stumbled upon a secret some believe worth killing to protect." Holmes's expression hardened. "We must decipher his notes before the alignment occurs 4 nights hence. I sense we are racing not only against the tide, but against a most dangerous adversary." Chapter 6. The Alignment of the Spheres. The following morning found us sequestered in our room at the Mariner's Rest, where Holmes had transformed the simple table into an impromptu laboratory and study. Spread before him were Trelawney's notes, the antique sextant, the bronze medallion, and various sketches Holmes had made of the carvings in the underground chamber. He had been working since dawn, consulting astronomical tables he had telegraphed London for, and which had arrived by the first morning post. "You see, Watson," he explained, his fingers tracing calculations on one of Trelawney's papers, "our missing lighthouse keeper was attempting to correlate the ancient observations recorded by the Brotherhood with modern astronomical knowledge. These symbols here," he indicated a series of concentric circles intersected by lines, "appear to track the movements of certain celestial bodies over extraordinarily long periods." "What is the significance of the alignment Trelawney discovered?" I asked, pouring us both coffee from the pot Mrs. Tregarth had kindly provided. Holmes's eyes gleamed with the excitement of intellectual discovery. "If I am interpreting these notations correctly, it concerns an alignment of Jupiter, Saturn, and a third body, possibly a comet, that occurs approximately once every 317 years. The Brotherhood appears to have been tracking this event since before Roman times, each occurrence being marked by some significant historical development. And this alignment occurs in 4 days' time? 3 now," Holmes corrected. "The calculations indicate it will reach its apex at precisely 11:47 p.m. on Thursday night." He picked up the bronze medallion, turning it in the light. "This device is not merely decorative, Watson. It is a simplified version of the larger astronomical calculator we observed in the chamber, a portable means of tracking the alignment." A knock at the door interrupted us. Captain Blackwood entered, accompanied by an elderly man in clerical attire. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, this is Father Collins from St. Petrock's Church. I mentioned your interest in local history, particularly concerning the Brotherhood." The elderly priest greeted us with a firm handshake belying his age. "Captain Blackwood's description of your underground discovery confirmed suspicions I have harbored for many years," he said. The parish records contain numerous oblique references to the Brotherhood of the Eternal Light, though their true purpose was never explicitly stated. Holmes cleared a space for the priest to sit. "What can you tell us about them, Father? Any information may prove vital." The Brotherhood was established here during the late Roman period, though their origins may be even older. They were ostensibly a religious order dedicated to maintaining the lighthouse, but the earliest parish records suggest their true purpose was the preservation of ancient astronomical knowledge. Father Collins removed a small notebook from his pocket. According to these records, they believed certain celestial alignments affected terrestrial events, tides, weather patterns, even human affairs. "Superstitious nonsense," I scoffed. "Perhaps," Holmes interjected, "though we should remember that ancient peoples often encoded genuine scientific observations within mystical frameworks. The Brotherhood may have observed real correlations between celestial events and natural phenomena, lacking only the scientific context to explain them properly." Father Collins nodded. The records indicate that during each alignment, the Brotherhood performed certain rituals at the lighthouse, supposedly to ensure favorable outcomes. After the catastrophe of 1547, when most of the Brotherhood perished, these practices were abandoned. "What exactly happened in 1547?" Holmes inquired. "A great storm coincided with the alignment. 6 members of the Brotherhood were found dead in the lighthouse under mysterious circumstances. The official account attributes their deaths to lightning, but local legend suggests otherwise. The Brotherhood's leader, a man known only as the Master Observer, disappeared entirely." "And what of Professor Morelli?" Holmes asked. "I understand he consulted the parish records during his visit." Father Collins looked surprised. "Indeed, he spent several days examining our oldest documents. He claimed to be researching medieval coastal defenses, but his questions focused primarily on the Brotherhood and their astronomical observations. I found it curious enough to make note of his specific inquiries, which were: he was particularly interested in accounts of the 1547 incident and any references to a device called the Chronolabe, which I assumed was some sort of astronomical instrument." Holmes sat forward abruptly. "The Chronolabe? Was there any description of this device?" "Only that it was the Brotherhood's most prized possession, a mechanism of brass and silver that could read the language of the stars and foretell what is to come." Holmes and I exchanged glances, both thinking of the intricate device we had observed in the underground chamber. After Father Collins departed, Holmes paced our small room with mounting excitement. "The pieces align, Watson. Trelawney discovers the underground chamber and the Chronolabe. He deciphers enough of the ancient records to calculate the impending alignment. Professor Morelli, with his suspiciously specific historical interests, appears shortly thereafter. Then Trelawney vanishes, and someone breaks into his quarters." "But what is the significance of this alignment?" I pressed. "Surely, in our modern age, an astronomical curiosity cannot justify murder." "There is something we are missing," Holmes admitted. "Something that connects the Brotherhood's observations to Trelawney's fate." He paused at the window, looking out toward the lighthouse. "We must return to the underground chamber before the alignment occurs." "The tide will not be sufficiently low until tomorrow night," I reminded him. "Then we must use today to gather what additional information we can." Holmes turned decisively. "I wish to examine the modern lighthouse more thoroughly, particularly the lantern room where Trelawney was last seen." We made our way to Pendlethorn Light, where Captain Blackwood introduced us to Jenkins, his assistant who had been attacked during the break-in. Jenkins was a ruddy-faced young man with a bandaged head and a nervous disposition. "I never saw who struck me, sir," he explained, as Holmes examined the spot where he had fallen, heard footsteps above, went to investigate, and next thing I knew I was waking up with the captain standing over me. Holmes nodded sympathetically, then requested to see the lantern room again. Once there, he proceeded to examine every inch of the circular chamber with his magnifying glass, paying particular attention to the floor and the great Fresnel lens at its center. The mechanism for rotating the lens is quite ingenious, Captain Blackwood explained. It provides a specific pattern of light flashes unique to this lighthouse, guiding ships safely past the dangerous rocks. Holmes paused, a peculiar expression crossing his face. The pattern of light flashes. Captain, how long has this specific pattern been used? Since the lighthouse was constructed in 1823. Prior to that, the old lighthouse used a steady beam, much less effective for navigation. And who determined the new pattern? The Admiralty, I believe, though the design was implemented by the original chief keeper, a Mr. Trevelyan, if I recall correctly. Trevelyan, Holmes repeated softly. The family connected to the Brotherhood. He turned to the window that faced the ruins. Watson, hand me your field glasses. Taking my binoculars, Holmes studied the ruins intently, then passed them to me. Observe the positioning of the modern lighthouse relative to the ancient one. I looked but saw nothing unusual. They are separated by perhaps 300 yards. And if one were to draw a line from the ancient lighthouse through the modern one, where would it point? I adjusted the glasses, following the imaginary line. Out to sea, I suppose. More specifically, Watson. At this time of year, at precisely midnight, that line points directly to the position where Jupiter and Saturn will appear, in conjunction 3 nights from now. Holmes's voice had dropped to an excited whisper. The modern lighthouse was deliberately positioned to maintain the ancient alignment. The Trevelyan family, descendants of the Brotherhood, ensured that the astronomical observations could continue, even after the old lighthouse was abandoned. But what of Trelawney? What of the Chronolabe? I asked. Holmes's expression grew grave. I fear our missing lighthouse keeper discovered not just an ancient astronomical record, but the true purpose behind it, a purpose someone will kill to either protect or exploit. He gathered his notes. Come, Watson, we must speak with Harris. Again. I believe our night watchman may have witnessed more than he realizes. Chapter 7. Shadows on the Cliff. Path we found Harris at his modest cottage near the harbor, mending fishing nets in the small front garden. The young man appeared uneasy at our arrival, but invited us inside with reluctant courtesy. I've told you. All I know, Mr. Holmes, he insisted as he served us mugs of strong tea. I'm not sure what more I can add. Sometimes, Holmes replied, settling into a worn chair. The mind observes details that go unrecognized in their significance. Let us revisit the night you saw Trelawney arguing with the mysterious figure on the cliff path. Was there anything distinctive about this man? Any detail, however small, that caught your attention? Harris frowned in concentration. He was tall and thin, as I mentioned. His clothing was dark, possibly a long coat or academic gown. I couldn't see his face clearly in the darkness. And their conversation? Could you discern any words? Only fragments. Something about rightful ownership and greater purpose. Trelawney seemed agitated, insisted something belonged to science, not private interests. Harris paused. Oh, and the stranger mentioned a name that struck me as odd, something like Selborne or Shelbourne. Holmes's eyes flickered with interest. Could it have been Sherburne? Harris nodded. Yes, that sounds right. Trelawney responded with considerable anger to that name. Most illuminating, Holmes murmured. Tell me, Mr. Harris, have you observed any unusual vessels along the coast recently? Perhaps a yacht or private steamship? As a matter of fact, yes. A sleek white yacht has been anchored beyond the harbor for nearly a week, just out of telescope. Range. Too far to make out a name or flag. Harris leaned forward. 2 nights ago, I observed a small boat being rowed to shore after midnight. 2 men disembarked on the beach north of the village, then made their way inland. I lost sight of them near the old quarry road. Did you report this? To whom? They weren't smugglers, carried no cargo. No crime in coming ashore, even at odd hours. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. One final question. Did Professor Morelli ever mention his institutional affiliation or the particular historical society he represented? No, though he received at least one telegram during his stay. I happened to be at the post office when it arrived. The clerk mentioned the message originated from London, sent by someone named Prendergast. After leaving Harris's cottage, Holmes suggested we walk along the cliff path toward the old quarry. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landscape, and a brisk wind carried the tang of salt and seaweed. "Your thoughts, Holmes?" I asked as we followed the narrow track. "Several separate threads are coming together, Watson. The name Sherburne is particularly significant. Sir Richard Sherburne is a well-known collector of antiquities, with a somewhat unsavory reputation for acquiring items of historical significance through dubious means. He was implicated in the theft of several rare manuscripts from Cambridge University 2 years ago, though nothing was ever proven. And Prendergast? If it is the same Prendergast I recall, he is a disgraced archaeologist who was dismissed from the British Museum after artifacts in his care mysteriously disappeared. Both men would have considerable interest in a device like the Chronolabe, particularly if it possesses the properties legend attributes to it. We reached a point on the path where it branched, one fork continuing along the cliff edge, the other descending toward a disused quarry. "Look here," Holmes said suddenly, kneeling to examine the ground. "Recent footprints, 2 distinct sets, one considerably larger than the other. They turned down the quarry path." He straightened. "Let us see where they lead." The old quarry had been abandoned decades ago, its gray stone walls forming a natural amphitheater partly reclaimed by vegetation. At its center stood the ruins of a small stone building, likely once the quarrymaster's office. Holmes approached it cautiously, signaling me to remain silent. The door hung ajar on rusted hinges. Inside we found evidence of recent occupation, cigarette ends, empty food tins, and the remains of a small fire. "Our mysterious visitors from the yacht have established a base of operations," Holmes whispered, examining a scrap of paper bearing hasty calculations. "And they share Trelawney's interest in tomorrow night's celestial alignment." A sudden noise outside caused us both to freeze. Holmes gestured me toward the back wall as heavy footsteps approached the hut. I reached for the revolver I had prudently brought along, but Holmes shook his head in warning. The footsteps paused at the threshold, then continued past, fading into the distance. We waited several minutes before cautiously emerging. "We were fortunate," Holmes remarked, as we made our way back to the cliff path. "But our investigation has not gone unnoticed. We must proceed with greater caution." Upon returning to the village, we found Captain Blackwood waiting anxiously at the inn. "Mr. Holmes, something most disturbing has occurred. Jenkins has disappeared." "Your assistant? When was he last seen?" "He left the lighthouse at noon to fetch supplies and never returned. I found this in his quarters." Blackwood handed Holmes a crumpled note. "I cannot continue this deception. Forgive me. What we found beneath the old light should have remained buried. They have promised no harm will come to anyone if the sea is surrendered. God help us all when the stars align." Holmes's expression darkened. "It seems young Jenkins was not the innocent victim he portrayed. Did he have access to Trelawney's quarters before the break-in?" "Certainly. We all did. The lighthouse is a communal living space." "Then he may well have been searching for something specific, something Trelawney had hidden." Holmes pocketed the note. "Captain, I must ask you to remain vigilant tonight. Watson and I must return to the underground chamber at the next low tide." "That would be approximately 2 a.m., Blackwood informed us. "But after what happened to Jenkins, is it wise to venture there?" "It is necessary," Holmes replied grimly. "The alignment occurs tomorrow night, and I am convinced that whatever fate befell Trelawney relates directly to what happens when Jupiter and Saturn reach conjunction. We must examine the Chronolabe more thoroughly." As dusk approached, Holmes surprised me by suggesting we visit the village church again. "There is something I wish to confirm before our midnight expedition," he explained. The church was empty save for Father Collins, who was arranging candles near the altar. He greeted us warmly, though with evident curiosity at our return. "Father," Holmes began, "the graves of the Brotherhood members, were there any artifacts or inscriptions that might illuminate their astronomical work?" "None on the gravestones themselves," Collins replied, "though beneath the altar lies a curious relic that tradition associates with them. I can show you if you wish." He led us to the ancient stone altar and pointed out a small brass plaque set into its base, easily overlooked unless one knew to search for it. The plaque bore the now familiar symbol of concentric circles intersected by a line surrounding a Latin inscription. "Lux veritatis in astris lucet," Holmes read. "The light of truth shines in the stars." And below, in smaller text, "Cavete falsum prophetam qui stellarum linguam corrumpit." "Beware the false prophet who corrupts the language of the stars," Father Collins translated. The plaque was installed after the tragedy of 1547. Some in the village believed the Brotherhood's master observer had betrayed his order, using their knowledge for personal gain. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Or perhaps attempting to prevent a misuse of that knowledge." He straightened. "Thank you, Father. You have provided the final piece of a most complex puzzle." As we left the church, I could contain my curiosity no longer. "What did you mean, Holmes? What puzzle have you solved?" "Not solved, Watson, but clarified. The Brotherhood was not merely observing the alignment but actively using it for some purpose. A purpose their leader may have considered dangerous." Holmes gazed toward the darkening sea, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "Tomorrow night, I believe we shall discover exactly what power the Chronolabe was designed to harness and why someone would kill to control it." Chapter 8. The Language of the Stars. The night was clear and still as we made our way once more along the causeway toward the Ancient Lighthouse ruins. The tide was at its lowest ebb, revealing the narrow stone path in the pale moonlight. Captain Blackwood had insisted on accompanying us again, but this time Holmes had requested he remain on the mainland, keeping watch with a signal lantern to warn of any approaching danger. "We must proceed with the utmost caution, Watson," Holmes advised as we reached the circular foundation. "Our previous visit did not go unnoticed, and I suspect we may find changes to the chamber below." The movable stone shifted more easily this time, suggesting recent and frequent use. Holmes descended first, his lantern casting dancing shadows on the spiral stairs. The air below seemed colder than before, with a peculiar metallic tang that had not been present during our previous visit. "Someone has been conducting experiments here," Holmes whispered as we reached the antechamber. "Do you detect it?" "A faint odor of electrical discharge, similar to what one might observe in a modern, scientific laboratory." The passages remained as we had found them before, but as we approached the main chamber, Holmes halted abruptly, extinguishing his lantern. In the sudden darkness, I discerned a faint bluish glow emanating from ahead, the same unearthly light we had observed from the village. "They are here now," Holmes breathed, his voice barely audible. "We must observe without being detected." We crept forward until we could peer into the circular chamber. The scene that greeted us was extraordinary. 3 men stood around the central stone table upon which the Chronolabe now sat fully uncovered and apparently operational. Its brass and silver components rotated slowly, emitting the mysterious blue light that bathed the chamber in ethereal radiance. One man I recognized from Holmes's description as Professor Morelli, tall, distinguished, with a neatly trimmed beard, and the bearing of an academic. Beside him stood a corpulent figure in expensive clothing whom I took to be Sir Richard Sherburne. The third man, younger and dressed in the manner of a ship's officer, was manipulating the device with evident expertise. "The calibration is nearly complete, Sir Richard," the young man reported. "By tomorrow night, the Chronolabe will be fully aligned with the celestial conjunction." "Excellent, Prendergast," Sherburne replied, his voice carrying the unmistakable cadence of aristocratic education. And you are certain of the predictive calculations? As certain as one can be with a device of this antiquity, Morelli interjected. The Brotherhood's records are remarkably precise. When Jupiter and Saturn align with the comet, focused through both lighthouses, the Chronolabe will not merely predict tidal phenomena but actually influence them. Imagine the military applications, Sherburne mused. The ability to create or disperse fog banks at will, to generate localized storms, to render harbors impassable or suddenly calm. The Admiralty will pay handsomely for such capability. Assuming we can control it, Prendergast cautioned. Trelawney's notes suggest the Brotherhood abandoned these experiments after the disaster of 1547, when an unexpected amplification of the effect generated a storm of unprecedented ferocity. Trelawney was a fool, Sherburne dismissed, too concerned with academic recognition to appreciate the practical value of his discovery. Had he cooperated, he might still be alive. Beside me, I felt Holmes tense at this tacit admission of murder. But his iron self-control prevailed. We continued to observe as the men made further adjustments to the device. The final component from Jenkins should arrive by morning, Morelli noted. With it, we can complete the calibration sequence. And what of Holmes and his doctor friend? Sherburne inquired. They've been disturbingly persistent. They will find the causeway impassable tomorrow night, Prendergast assured him. I've calculated the tidal effect to ensure it. As the men continued their work, Holmes touched my arm, signaling our retreat. We withdrew silently through the passage until we reached a safe distance to relight our lantern. We have our confirmation. Watson, Holmes whispered grimly. Trelawney discovered that the Chronolabe was not merely an astronomical calculator, but a device designed to harness the gravitational effects of celestial alignments to influence tidal patterns. The Brotherhood used it to predict and possibly control local weather phenomena, knowledge that would be invaluable for maritime navigation and defense. And these men murdered Trelawney to obtain it, I concluded. Precisely. He refused to assist them in weaponizing an ancient technology that had already proven dangerously unpredictable. Holmes's expression was resolute. We must prevent them from activating the Chronolabe during tomorrow night's alignment. The consequences could be catastrophic. We ascended the spiral staircase and emerged once more onto the ruins, carefully replacing the stone. The tide was beginning to turn, the causeway already narrowing as water encroached from both sides. We have little time, Holmes observed, setting a brisk pace back toward the mainland. Tomorrow night's alignment is the culmination of Sherburne's scheme, but I believe they plan one final test tonight, using the partial alignment already visible. We had nearly reached the shore when a flash of light from Captain Blackwood's position signaled danger. Holmes immediately doused our lantern, pulling me down behind a rocky outcropping. Moments later, a small boat appeared, rowing steadily toward the ruins. Two figures disembarked onto the rapidly shrinking causeway. Jenkins, Holmes whispered, recognizing the lighthouse assistant's sturdy form, and likely one of Sherburne's yacht crew. They're bringing the final component for the Chronolabe. We waited until they had disappeared into the ruins before continuing our journey to the mainland. Captain Blackwood greeted us with evident relief. Two men approached from the North Cliff path, he explained. I signaled as soon as I spotted them. Your vigilance is appreciated, Captain, Holmes replied. What we have learned tonight confirms my worst suspicions. Trelawney was murdered because he discovered the true purpose of the Ancient Lighthouse and refused to participate in a scheme to weaponize its technology. Back at the inn, Holmes outlined what we had overheard. The Brotherhood originally used the Chronolabe to predict tidal phenomena, providing invaluable navigational guidance in these treacherous waters. But during the 1547 alignment, something went catastrophically wrong. Perhaps an attempt to enhance the effect resulted in the devastating storm that destroyed the lighthouse and killed most of the order. And the master observer? I inquired. I suspect he either sabotaged the attempt, recognizing its danger, or perished trying to prevent it. Holmes consulted his pocket watch. It is nearly dawn. We have less than 18 hours before the alignment reaches its apex. We must devise a strategy to prevent Sherburne and his accomplices from activating the Chronolabe. Surely we should alert the authorities, Captain Blackwood suggested. Holmes shook his head. The nearest police officials are hours away, and our tale would sound fantastical without proof. No, we three must resolve this ourselves. His eyes gleamed with determination. First, we must secure the modern lighthouse. It forms part of the alignment mechanism. Then, we must find a way to disrupt their access to the underground chamber before night falls. As the first pale light of dawn illuminated the horizon, I could see both lighthouses clearly from our window. The modern structure standing tall and proud, the ancient ruins barely visible as the high tide washed over them. Between them, somewhere, out at sea, lay Sherburne's yacht, awaiting the celestial event that had been anticipated for centuries. "The game is afoot, Watson," Holmes said softly, "and rarely have the stakes been higher." Chapter 9. A Trap. Iset Holmes spent the morning in fevered preparation, dispatching telegrams to London and consulting nautical charts of the coastline. His energy was remarkable, especially considering our late-night excursion. By mid-morning, he had formulated a plan that was both ingenious and perilous. "Sherburne and his accomplices believe they have accounted for every contingency," Holmes explained as we gathered in Captain Blackwood's quarters at the modern lighthouse. "Their primary advantage lies in their control of the underground chamber and the Chronolabe. Our counter-strategy must focus on disrupting the alignment mechanism." "But how?" Blackwood asked. "The celestial bodies cannot be moved, and they have the ancient device." "The alignment requires 3 elements," Holmes replied, spreading a diagram on the table. "The conjunction of Jupiter, Saturn, and the comet in the night sky, the Chronolabe itself, and crucially, the precise positioning of both lighthouses to focus these celestial energies." I studied the diagram, which showed how the 2 lighthouses created a line pointing directly to the position where the celestial bodies would align. "So if we disable this lighthouse?" "Precisely, Watson. Without the modern lighthouse functioning, in concert with the ancient site, the alignment's power cannot be properly channeled into the Chronolabe." Holmes turned to Blackwood. "Captain, does this lighthouse have any unique mechanical components that would be difficult to replace on short notice?" Blackwood considered the question. "The main drive gear for the rotating mechanism is custom-made. Without it, the light cannot move in its proper pattern." "Excellent. We shall remove it as our last resort." Holmes paced the small room. "However, I prefer a solution that allows us to apprehend these criminals in the act. To that end, I propose we allow them to believe their plan is proceeding unhindered, while secretly preparing our countermeasures." Holmes outlined his strategy with characteristic precision. Blackwood would appear to maintain normal lighthouse operations, but would secretly disable certain critical mirrors in the Fresnel lens that would prevent the proper focusing of light. Meanwhile, Holmes would disguise himself as a local fisherman to conduct surveillance on Sherburne's yacht, while I would maintain watch on the path to the ruins. "The alignment reaches its apex at precisely 11:47 p.m., Holmes reminded us. "Whatever Sherburne intends must occur at that exact moment. We must be in position well beforehand." As we finalized our preparations, a telegram arrived from London in response to Holmes's earlier inquiry. He read it with evident satisfaction. "As I suspected," he announced, "Sir Richard Sherburne has recently acquired substantial financial backing from foreign interests, specifically a consortium with connections to naval intelligence agencies. They believe they are funding archaeological research, but are unwittingly supporting the development of a weather control weapon." "Surely such a thing is impossible," I protested. "In its fullest conception, perhaps," Holmes conceded. But even a device that could generate localized fog or affect tidal patterns would have immense strategic value. The Brotherhood understood this centuries ago, which is why they kept the Chronolabe's true purpose secret. By late afternoon, our preparations were complete. Holmes had transformed himself into a remarkably convincing fisherman, complete with weather-beaten complexion and salt-stained clothing. Even his voice had adopted the distinctive local accent. "I shall row out near Sherburn's yacht under the pretense of checking lobster pots," he explained. "From there, I can observe any movement between the vessel and shore." I was to position myself in a small hollow near the path to the ruins, armed with my service revolver and a signaling mirror to communicate with Blackwood at the lighthouse. The captain himself would maintain his normal duties while secretly implementing Holmes's technical sabotage. "One final matter," Holmes said before we separated. "I have arranged with Father Collins to ring the church bell at precisely 11:40 p.m., ostensibly as a practice for Sunday services. This will be our signal to commence the final phase of our plan." The afternoon passed with excruciating slowness. I watched from our inn window as Holmes rowed his small fishing boat out into the bay, deftly maneuvering like a man born to the sea. His talent for disguise and adaptation never ceased to amaze me. As dusk approached, I made my way to my assigned position, concealed among rocks overlooking the causeway to the ruins. The tide was beginning to recede, gradually exposing the stone path that would become fully accessible by approximately 10:30 p.m., according to Blackwood's calculations. From my vantage point, I could observe both lighthouses, the modern one already, sending its powerful beam out to sea in its regular pattern, the ancient ruins dark and seemingly abandoned. Yet I knew that beneath those weathered stones, the Chronolabe waited, its intricate mechanisms prepared for the celestial event that had been anticipated for centuries. As night deepened, stars emerged in the clear sky. I located Jupiter and Saturn, unusually bright and drawing noticeably closer to each other with each passing hour. The comet that completed the alignment was visible as a faint smudge of light, growing more distinct as the sky darkened completely. Shortly after 10:04 p.m., I observed movement on the water. A small boat had detached from Sherburn's yacht and was making its way toward shore. Through my field glasses, I could discern 3 figures aboard, undoubtedly Sherburn, Morelli, and Prendergast. They landed on a small beach north of the village, proceeded cautiously along the cliff path, and began their descent toward the causeway, which was now mostly exposed. I signaled Blackwood using my mirror, reflecting a brief flash of moonlight toward the lighthouse in our prearranged code. Moments later, I detected movement from another direction, 2 figures approaching from the village. As they drew closer, I recognized Jenkins, accompanied by a burly sailor likely from Sherburn's crew. They carried a wooden case between them, presumably containing the final component for the Chronolabe. I remained motionless as both parties converged at the causeway, exchanged brief words, and proceeded together toward the ruins. Once they were halfway across, I slipped from my hiding place and followed at a discreet distance. The group disappeared beneath the movable stone, leaving the sailor to stand guard. I withdrew to a concealed position to await Holmes's arrival, wondering where my friend might be and whether his surveillance of the yacht had yielded additional information. The minutes crept by with agonizing slowness. The celestial bodies continued their inexorable movement toward perfect alignment. At approximately 11:30 p.m., I observed a small boat approaching the ruins from seaward. Holmes, adhering to our timetable. He beached his boat silently and made his way toward me with the stealthy grace that belied his disguise. Upon reaching my position, he discarded the most restrictive elements of his costume. "Sherburn has more men aboard the yacht than anticipated," he whispered. "They are monitoring the operation by telescope and prepared to signal with rockets. We must move quickly." He checked his watch. 10 minutes until the church bell. "Are they all below?" "All except one guard at the entrance," I confirmed. Holmes nodded grimly. Then let us proceed with the final phase. Remember, Watson, under no circumstances can we allow the Chronolabe to be activated at the moment of perfect alignment. With that, we moved forward to confront whatever awaited us beneath the ancient lighthouse, as the stars above continued their silent procession toward the configuration that had been anticipated with both wonder and dread for centuries. Chapter 10. The Chronolabe Awakens. The distant church bell tolled the appointed hour as Holmes and I approached the entrance to the underground chamber. The guard, a burly seaman with a weathered face, stood alert, hand resting on what I presumed to be a concealed weapon. "We need not risk confrontation," Holmes whispered. "Observe." From his pocket he withdrew a small glass vial. Approaching from downwind, he deftly uncorked it and cast the contents toward the guard. A nearly invisible powder dispersed through the air. Within seconds, the man's posture slackened. He blinked rapidly, swayed, and then collapsed silently onto the soft earth. "A harmless sedative of my own concoction," Holmes explained, securing the unconscious guard with rope from his fisherman's disguise. "He will awaken with nothing worse than a mild headache." The stone entrance had been left partially open. Holmes slipped through first, and I followed, my revolver at the ready. The spiral staircase was now illuminated by electric lamps attached to the walls, a modern intrusion upon the ancient stonework. "They've established a more permanent operation than I anticipated," Holmes observed as we descended. "Note the telegraph wire running alongside the lamps. They've created a direct communication link to the yacht." We proceeded cautiously, pausing at the antechamber to assess the situation. The blue glow from the main chamber was now pulsating, its intensity growing steadily stronger. Voices echoed through the passages, tense with anticipation. "The alignment draws near," came Morelli's distinctive academic tone. "The calibration must be precise." "Stop fussing, Professor," Sherburne's aristocratic drawl replied. "Jenkins, is the amplification component installed?" "Yes, sir. The Chronolabe is fully operational." Holmes gestured for me to remain in position while he crept forward to gain a better vantage point. He returned moments later, his expression grave. "5 men in total," he whispered. "Sherburne, Morelli, Prendergast, Jenkins, and another sailor operating a portable telegraph. The Chronolabe is fully assembled on the central altar, connected to electrical equipment of modern design. They appear to be amplifying its capabilities, far beyond what the Brotherhood originally intended." "What's our approach?" I asked. "We must disable the device without triggering its activation. A direct confrontation is too risky." Holmes checked his watch. 7 minutes until perfect alignment. Captain Blackwood should be implementing his sabotage of the lighthouse lens now, but we cannot rely solely on that. He surveyed our surroundings, his keen eyes searching for an advantage. "There," he said suddenly, pointing to where the electrical wires powering their equipment ran along the passage floor. "Their power source. If we—" A sharp click behind us froze the words in his throat. We turned slowly to find Jenkins standing in the passage, a revolver trained steadily upon us. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice betraying no surprise. "Dr. Watson, I suspected you might attempt interference." He raised his voice. "Sir Richard, we have visitors." Moments later, we were marched into the main chamber at gunpoint. Sir Richard Sherburne was a corpulent man in his 50s, expensively dressed despite the subterranean setting. His florid face registered annoyance rather than alarm at our appearance. "Ah, the famous consulting detective," he remarked. "Captain Blackwood mentioned you were troublesomely persistent. I had rather hoped our little deception about the tides would keep you ashore tonight." "A basic calculation error," Holmes replied calmly. "No experienced seaman would be misled by such an elementary attempt." "No matter," Sherburne dismissed. "You're too late to prevent what we've set in motion. In precisely 6 minutes, the alignment will reach perfection, and the Chronolabe will demonstrate its full potential." He gestured to Prendergast. Continue the calibration sequence. The chamber was transformed from when we had first discovered it. Modern scientific equipment surrounded the ancient device, with wires connecting to batteries and measuring instruments. The Chronolabe itself was now fully activated, its concentric brass rings rotating at varying speeds, the central crystal emitting the pulsating blue light that grew steadily more intense. "You understand nothing of what you're tampering with," Holmes said, his voice carrying an edge I rarely heard. "The Brotherhood abandoned these experiments after the catastrophe of 1547. Because they lacked our modern understanding of electromagnetic principles," Morelli interjected, adjusting a dial on his equipment. "We've corrected the flaws in their methodology." "Have you indeed?" Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Then perhaps you've accounted for the variance in gravitational influence caused by the comet's irregular mass distribution." The Brotherhood's records suggested that was the critical factor in the 1547 disaster. I recognized Holmes's tactic immediately, sowing doubt and confusion while carefully observing our surroundings for any opportunity. Morelli hesitated, glancing at his calculations with sudden uncertainty. "The calculations are sound," Prendergast insisted, though I detected a falter in his confidence. "Enough scientific debate," Sherburne snapped. "Secure them by the far wall, and continue the sequence." As Jenkins moved to comply, a sudden sharp report echoed from above. The lighthouse signal gun, fired 3 times in rapid succession. "The agreed signal," the sailor at the telegraph exclaimed. "Something's wrong at the lighthouse." "Blackwood," Sherburne growled. "Jenkins, go and investigate. Ensure the lighthouse beam remains operational." "Sir, the alignment is in less than 4 minutes," Jenkins protested, "which is why the lighthouse must function correctly. Go." As Jenkins reluctantly departed, Holmes caught my eye with the briefest glance toward the electrical equipment. I understood his intention immediately. "Your ambition blinds you to the danger, Sir Richard," Holmes continued, edging subtly toward the apparatus. "Even assuming you could control the effect, do you truly believe foreign powers would allow such a weapon to remain in private hands? You would become the most hunted man in Europe." "Not a weapon, Mr. Holmes. A tool of influence," Sherburne corrected. "The ability to disrupt enemy naval operations while appearing entirely natural. No connection to Britain could ever be proven." The Chronolabe's pulsations accelerated, the blue light now bright enough to cast sharp shadows throughout the chamber. The air crackled with a strange energy that raised the hairs on my arms. 2 minutes to alignment," Prendergast announced, consulting a chronometer. "You might be interested to know," Holmes remarked conversationally, "that I took the liberty of sending a complete account of your operation to my brother Mycroft at the Foreign Office this morning, including, I might add, the names of your foreign financiers." Sherburne's face darkened. "You're bluffing?" "Am I?" Holmes's smile was cold. "How else would I know about Baron Gruner's investment of £50,000, or Count Silvius's provision of scientific equipment?" The names were unfamiliar to me, but they clearly struck home with Sherburne, whose composure visibly faltered. As he turned to confer urgently with Morelli, Holmes made his move. With a swift, practiced motion, he knocked over a battery unit, sending acid spilling across the ancient floor toward the Chronolabe. Simultaneously, I lunged for the sailors. "Telegraph!" toppling it with a crash. "Stop them!" Sherburne bellowed, drawing a small pistol from his jacket. What happened next occurred with such speed and confusion that my recollection remains imperfect. The Chronolabe's pulsations suddenly intensified, the blue light expanding in a blinding flash. A tremendous vibration shook the chamber, dislodging ancient stones from the ceiling. "The alignment!" Morelli shouted. "It's happening prematurely!" Holmes seized my arm, pulling me toward the exit passage. "Run, Watson! The chamber is collapsing!" Behind us, the Chronolabe emitted a high-pitched whine, its components spinning with impossible speed. I glimpsed Sherburne and his associates, scrambling frantically with their equipment before Holmes and I plunged into the darkness of the passage. the sound of falling masonry pursuing us like the wrath of the ancient brotherhood themselves. Chapter 11. When the tide turns, our ascent from the collapsing chamber was a desperate scramble through darkness and falling debris. The spiral staircase trembled beneath our feet, ancient stones shifting as if the very foundation of the island was being disturbed. Behind us, the blue glow had transformed into a blinding radiance that pursued us like a living entity through the narrow passage. "Keep moving, Watson," Holmes urged as we reached the final curve of the staircase. Above us, the night sky was visible through the entrance, a blessed glimpse of escape. We emerged onto the ruins just as a tremendous crack split the stone beneath our feet. The entire island seemed to shudder, and to my horror, I saw that the causeway connecting us to the mainland was already submerged beneath rapidly rising waters. "The tide!" I exclaimed. "It's coming in far too quickly." Holmes scanned our surroundings with remarkable composure despite our peril. "The Chronolabe's effect on tidal patterns has begun. Look there." Following his gesture, I beheld an extraordinary sight. The sea around us was behaving in a manner contrary to all natural law. Currents swirled in conflicting directions, and a circular pattern of water was forming around the island, creating a whirlpool effect that grew more pronounced by the second. "To the boat!" Holmes commanded, pointing to where his small fishing vessel remained secured on the far side of the island. "Quickly, before the effect intensifies." As we ran, I glanced back to see if any of Sherburne's party had escaped the underground chamber. A figure emerged from the opening, silhouetted against the blue light still emanating from below. It was Jenkins, his face contorted with fear, as he scrambled away from the collapsing entrance. "Holmes," I called, but my friend had already seen. "He must fend for himself, Watson. That entire structure is moments from collapse." We reached the boat and pushed it into the increasingly turbulent water. Holmes took the oars, his powerful strokes driving us away from the island just as a section of the ancient lighthouse ruins collapsed with a thunderous roar. The blue light shot skyward in a brilliant column before abruptly extinguishing. "Look to the heavens, Watson," Holmes directed as he rowed with all his strength. Above us, the celestial alignment had reached its apex. Jupiter and Saturn appeared, nearly merged from our perspective, while the comet formed a perfect third point in the configuration. Yet even as I watched, clouds began forming with unnatural speed, swirling around the alignment as if drawn to it. The sea grew increasingly violent, waves mounting in height and force with each passing moment. Holmes fought valiantly against the chaotic currents, but our small craft was pitifully inadequate against such elemental fury. "We cannot reach the shore directly," Holmes shouted above the roar of water. "Our only chance is to make for the lighthouse." He altered our course toward the modern structure that stood tall and defiant against the gathering storm. Captain Blackwood must have seen our plight, for the lighthouse beam now swung repeatedly in our direction, providing a beacon to guide our desperate approach. A massive wave suddenly lifted our small boat, carrying us perilously close to the jagged rocks that surrounded the lighthouse promontory. Holmes waited for precisely the right moment, then called, "Jump, Watson, now!" We leapt from the boat an instant before it splintered against the rocks. The freezing water closed over my head, but Holmes's strong grip found my collar, guiding me toward a small ladder attached to the lighthouse foundation. Somehow we dragged ourselves onto the narrow maintenance platform, then climbed the exterior ladder to the lighthouse door where Captain Blackwood stood ready to assist us. Inside, "Quickly," he urged, pulling us through the doorway. "The worst is yet to come." From the relative safety of the lighthouse, we witnessed the full manifestation of the Chronolabe's power. The storm that had been gathering now erupted with supernatural ferocity. Lightning split the sky in continuous blinding forks, striking the water around the ruins with unnatural precision. The sea itself seemed to rise up against the island, waves mounting to impossible heights before crashing down upon the ancient stones. Exactly as in 1547, Holmes remarked grimly, water streaming from his sodden clothing. The Brotherhood's records described just such a phenomenon when the Chronolabe was improperly activated. But will it spread beyond this immediate area? Blackwood asked, his professional concern for shipping evident. I think not, Holmes replied. The effect appears localized to the alignment zone between the two lighthouses. Once the celestial conjunction passes, which should occur within the hour, the phenomenon should dissipate. And Sherburne? His associates? I inquired. Holmes's expression was solemn. If they remained in the chamber when the Chronolabe fully activated, I fear they have shared the fate of the Brotherhood members in 1547. We watched in silence as nature's fury focused on the ancient lighthouse ruins. With each massive wave, more of the structure disappeared beneath the churning waters. Within 30 minutes, nothing remained visible of the island save for occasional glimpses of the highest stones when the waves momentarily receded. The repository of ancient knowledge lost once more, Holmes murmured. Perhaps it is for the best. Some secrets are too dangerous for any age. By dawn, the storm had subsided as Holmes had predicted. The sea returned to its normal state, showing no evidence of the night's supernatural disturbance save for the complete absence of the ruins, now fully submerged beneath the high tide. A Coast Guard cutter arrived mid-morning, responding to reports of the unusual storm. We observed from the lighthouse as they discovered Sherburne's yacht abandoned, its crew having fled when the weather phenomena began. There was no sign of Sherburne, Morelli, or Prendergast. Should we tell them the truth? Blackwood wondered as we prepared to meet the authorities. A carefully edited version, Holmes advised. The involvement of foreign agents attempting to conduct unsanctioned experiments with weather patterns should suffice. My brother Mycroft will ensure the more sensitive details remain classified. And Jenkins? I asked, for we had seen no sign of the treacherous assistant since his emergence from the underground chamber. Holmes shook his head. The sea has claimed him, along with the others. A fitting justice, perhaps, considering his role in Trelawney's disappearance. As the Coast Guard vessel approached the lighthouse, I found myself contemplating the extraordinary events we had witnessed. Holmes, do you believe the Brotherhood truly understood the power they were harnessing? To some degree, he replied thoughtfully. They recognized both its potential utility and its terrible danger, which is why they concealed it so carefully. The master observer who disappeared in 1547 likely sacrificed himself to prevent exactly the kind of catastrophe Sherburne sought to weaponize. Then, in a way, history repeated itself last night. Indeed, Watson, and I suspect the sea will guard those secrets more effectively now. Holmes gazed toward the spot where the ruins had stood. The tide has turned on the ancient lighthouse, for the final time. As we prepared to depart Pendlethorn Point, I realized that one question remained unresolved in my mind. What of Trelawney, Holmes? We never discovered his fate. Holmes paused, his keen eyes scanning the horizon, where the morning sun now glittered on peaceful waters. I have a theory, Watson, though it must remain speculative. I believe Trelawney discovered the truth about the Chronolabe and attempted to disable it permanently, perhaps fearing its misuse. He may have fallen victim to its partial activation, or to Sherburne's agents. We may never know for certain, I observed. Some mysteries, my dear Watson, are destined to remain unsolved. Holmes smiled faintly. Though in this case, perhaps, the greater mystery, that of the Brotherhood's ancient knowledge, has solved itself by returning to the depths from which it came. Chapter 12. The Light of Truth. 1 week after our extraordinary adventure at Pendlethorn Point, Holmes and I were once again ensconced in our familiar quarters at 221B Baker Street. The London papers had carried only brief accounts of a severe, localized storm along the Cornish coast, with a short paragraph noting the unfortunate loss of Sir Richard Sherburne's yacht during the unexpected meteorological disturbance. No mention was made of Sherburne himself, nor of his associates. Holmes sat in his favorite armchair by the fire, pipe in hand, reviewing a letter that had arrived with the Morning Post. The case had maintained its grip on his active mind, leading him to pursue certain inquiries even after our return to London. "Most interesting, Watson," he remarked, passing the letter to me. Professor Morelli's academic credentials were entirely fabricated. The University of Bologna has never employed anyone by that name, and the historical society he claimed to represent does not exist. A complete impostor, then? Indeed. And according to my sources at Scotland Yard, the man we knew, as Morelli closely matches the description of one Paolo Vannucci, a notorious Italian forger and confidence man, with connections to several European intelligence services. Holmes tapped his pipe thoughtfully against the mantelpiece. He specialized in authenticating fraudulent historical artifacts, a useful skill when attempting to understand the Chronolabe's mechanisms. I had spent the morning writing up my notes on the case, though I confess I struggled to capture the more fantastic elements of our experience in a manner that would seem credible. "There is one aspect that continues to puzzle me, Holmes," I admitted. "How did you deduce the connection between the modern lighthouse's position and the celestial alignment?" That insight seemed almost intuitive. Holmes smiled faintly. "Not intuition, but observation, Watson. When examining Trelawney's quarters, I noticed his astronomical calculations included precise coordinates for both lighthouses. Initially, I assumed this was merely for navigational reference, but when I saw the antique sextant with its unusual calibrations, I realized he was measuring something beyond standard navigation, the alignment between the structures and the celestial bodies. Precisely. The Brotherhood designed the original lighthouse not merely to warn ships, but to position observers at the exact coordinates needed to track their celestial phenomenon. When the Trevelyan family commissioned the modern lighthouse, they ensured it maintained this astronomical alignment. Holmes picked up the bronze medallion, which we had recovered before leaving Cornwall. This device is essentially a portable calculator for determining when the alignment would occur. And yet, for all their knowledge, the Brotherhood could not control the power they discovered, I observed. A lesson Sherburne learned too late, Holmes agreed. Some forces are beyond human capacity to harness safely. Our conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Hudson, who announced the arrival of a government messenger. The young man delivered a sealed envelope bearing Mycroft Holmes's distinctive stationery. "My brother has been most efficient," Holmes remarked after the messenger departed. He broke the seal and scanned the contents. "Ah, confirmation of several points. The body of a man matching Jenkins's description has washed ashore near Plymouth. No sign of Sherburne or Prendergast, though the search continues. Do you believe they could have survived? The sea is an unforgiving judge, Watson, but it occasionally grants reprieves. I would not be surprised if Sherburne's considerable resources had enabled him to prepare contingencies." Holmes continued reading. "Mycroft reports that the foreign investors behind Sherburne's operation have suddenly withdrawn all interest in weather research. Our demonstration appears to have convinced them of its impracticality." Holmes refolded the letter, his expression becoming contemplative. "There is another matter Mycroft mentions, a curious detail about William Trelawney's background." "Oh? It seems our missing lighthouse keeper was not merely a failed academic. Before taking his position at Pendlethorn Light, he was briefly employed by the Admiralty's Hydrographic Office, with a focus on researching historical navigation methods. He was dismissed under somewhat mysterious circumstances involving unauthorized access to classified archives. You suspect he already knew of the Brotherhood and their work before arriving at Pendlethorn?" I deduced. "It would explain his particular interest in the ruins and his immediate recognition of the significance of the underground chamber." Holmes steepled his fingers beneath his chin. "I believe Trelawney sought the position specifically to investigate the Brotherhood's secrets, perhaps initially for academic purposes. Once he discovered the true power of the Chronolabe, however, his conscience would not permit its exploitation. A telegram arrived later that afternoon from Captain Blackwood, informing us that extensive searches of the coastline had recovered various pieces of wreckage, including fragments of scientific equipment bearing Sherbourne's insignia. More significantly, divers had attempted to examine the site where the ruins had stood, only to discover that the seabed had been drastically altered. Where the ancient lighthouse had once been, there was now only a deep fissure in the ocean floor, as if the entire structure and the chambers beneath had been swallowed by the earth itself. Nature has secured the Brotherhood's secrets more thoroughly than man ever could, Holmes observed. Perhaps that is as it should be. That evening, as we sat before the fire enjoying a fine brandy, I reflected on the extraordinary case that had begun with a missing lighthouse keeper and culminated in the unleashing of forces beyond mortal understanding. Do you suppose the Brotherhood truly believed they could predict future events with the Chronolabe? I asked. I suspect they observed correlations between celestial alignments and terrestrial phenomena that appeared predictive, Holmes replied. Our modern science recognizes that planetary gravitational forces can influence tides and weather patterns. The Brotherhood simply lacked the theoretical framework to explain what they observed empirically. And yet the final alignment did trigger precisely the cataclysm their records predicted, I pointed out. Holmes smiled enigmatically. The boundary between advanced science and apparent magic has always been permeable, Watson. Arthur C. Clarke once observed that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. I started at this. I'm not familiar with that quotation, nor the gentleman you attribute it to. A curious expression crossed Holmes's face, quickly replaced by his usual composed demeanor. A philosophical acquaintance, he said dismissively. The point remains that the Brotherhood stumbled upon principles we are only beginning to comprehend scientifically. As the evening deepened into night, I found myself gazing out the window at the stars above London, partially obscured by the city's omnipresent fog. Somewhere among those distant points of light, the cosmic forces that had driven our adventure continued their eternal movements, indifferent to the brief human dramas played out beneath their gaze. One final question, Holmes, I said, turning from the window. Do you believe there are other repositories of ancient knowledge still waiting to be discovered? Without doubt, he replied, refilling our glasses. Human history is far longer and more complex than our conventional scholarship acknowledges. Civilizations rise and fall, and in the intervals, much is forgotten or deliberately concealed. A sobering thought, yet also an inspiring one. Holmes raised his glass in a toast. To the endless frontier of the unknown, Watson, and to the light of truth that guides us through its darkness. Even when that light emanates from an ancient lighthouse? I asked with a smile. Especially then, my dear friend, Holmes replied, his eyes gleaming with the familiar fire of intellectual passion that defined his remarkable character. Especially then. Outside our window, a comet streaked briefly across the London sky, its significance noted by none save the world's only consulting detective, who marked its passage with a satisfied nod before returning to the comfortable certainties of pipe, brandy, and the enduring friendship that had weathered yet another remarkable adventure.